Hello and welcome to the official Xbox 360 Magazine podcast. I'm John Hicks, I'm the editor. I'm joined in our studio by Edwin Evans-Thirlwell, online editor.
Hello.
And our special guest, possibly even guest host given how many times he's been on, is Pete Hines from Bethesda.
Thank you for having me back again.
It's always a pleasure. This is a bit unusual because previously we've kind of got you in to grill you about upcoming release such as Skyrim.
Right.
This time we wanted to talk about year-old release.
Excellent.
Skyrim.
I can't spoil those.
Yeah. So yes, we don't have the shadow of Todd Howard preventing spoilers or anything. I'm really interested in Skyrim because it's still rolling. You're still doing DLC for it. It's still massively popular. I think it's, as of last week, it's the most popular game on Xbox Live, even though it's a single-player game. And you're still releasing DLC for it, which is sort of mad, given that the game's like a year old now.
Right.
Is it, from your point of view, is it just as popular now as it ever has been? Is the DLC selling as well for each one? Are you kind of is that audience growing?
I don't know if it's as successful as it ever has been, given it was pretty insane there right around launch and for those first few months and how many people were playing it. So it's hard to say that now it's as popular as it was then. But having said that, it's the most popular game we've ever done, given how far it is from launch and how many people are still playing it and buying DLC and those kinds of things. So it's been a lot of fun, and we're pleased that everybody continues to play the game and enjoy the game and enjoy the DLC. That's that's our hope, as we make good stuff that people want to play.
And obviously you can't make DLC for it indefinitely because you're going to have to get the team to work on that next game, whatever that is. But I'm fascinated by the fact that if you put out a new DLC chapter today, it would still sell, presumably really well. And is that something that gives them the strength of the game and how enthusiastic the fans are? Is that something that you look at? Are you kind of changing the way you think about DLC? Because
I think every time we do a game, we do it slightly differently in terms of the size of it, how many we do. We try and find the right mix of enough content, but not so much that it takes us forever to put it out, but not so little that it feels too small. So trying to find that sweet spot. I think we altered slightly what we were going to do on Skyrim. If you had asked us, and we would have actually told you before launch, like, what do you think you'll do after launch? I think what we thought we were going to do and what we ended up doing ended up being slightly different and evolved a bit as we went along. But I think at the end of the day, we're really pleased with what we've been able to do. The reaction to Dragonborn has been very strong. Folks really seem to enjoy it. It feels both familiar and different, taking you to a different place. Those are the kinds of things that I think people look for in DLC, particularly folks who have been playing the game, as you said, and playing it and playing it and playing it. And for the folks who played it and then left and, sort of waited till Dragonborn came out as a reason to come back and re-engage. And so something that sticks well with both of those audiences, I think, is not always the easiest thing to do, but we're pretty pleased with the response from everybody.
Can I just ask about the game jam video that you showed off, where you put in some features that didn't make it into the original game, and some of those came through as DLC. I mean, was that kind of like a deliberate attempt to sound out fans on their feelings for some of these ideas?
No, because technically we never actually released that. So and there was some amount of hand-wringing over it. That was part of Todd's DICE talk at DICE last year when he did the keynote. And he told me we had done this game jam, sort of around the holidays after the game came out. And then he said, I'm thinking about using this in this talk to kind of show how we make games and come up with ideas and how important it is, not to do it on paper, but to do it in the game. And it was one of those things where I was like, you can do that, but everybody's going to find out about this, and then they're going to want to know where the hell is that feature that I saw that I know you were working on it because I saw it in his video. And ultimately we decided that it was worth showing for his talk, and that hopefully people would take it in the spirit in which it was intended, which is this is not a video of promises, but just an example of some of the things that we've done, and some of those have panned out and we've released them, and some of them haven't, and you won't be seeing them. But at the end of the day, that was a cool way for our devs to sort of wrap their heads around what are the things that you would like to do in Skyrim now that it's out, that you would like to do, whether it's in a DLC or just in a patch update or whatever it might be.
And do you think you've sort of tapped out those ideas now? And I guess from the developer's point of view, that they worked on it for however many years, it's been out for a year, are they kind of is there still an interest in adding things to it, or is you more about what the next big thing?
We have a pretty creative team, so I think it's safe to say that we could always come up with something. I think it's more likely that the team is ready to move on to something before they run out of ideas. To your point, we do start to want to move folks over onto the next project. Our games tend not to be short dev cycles. Mm-hmm. They take a while. And so at some point you do want to say, okay, like we've done what we need to, and it's time to start getting these content people moved over into building the next thing that we're doing. So, there's probably some relief on the side on the part of some of the devs, because they've been working on Skyrim now for 5 years. Like, I think they're ready to go do
something different.
Yeah.
There's only so many mountains you can code.
Yeah.
I was just wondering about the relationship between development of Dawnguard and Dragonborn in particular. I mean, were those very different things to make in terms of how did the process differ?
Yes, in terms of Dragonborn was really mostly just the kernel of an idea, while Dawnguard was kind of off and running. And I think some of the things that we decided to try and do in Dragonborn evolved over time. And again, some of those things were like, well, maybe that thing from the Game Jam thing, is there a way that we can, implement that was a cool feature? And, even things like dragon riding took various forms through the development of Dragonborn as we tried to figure out, like, what's the right amount of, we did a version where you could do X, and it was like, wow, that breaks everything. And then you scale it all the way back, and like, well, that feels too restrictive. And so you try and find a sweet spot that allows, the feature to feel like a feature without it wreaking havoc. Because in a game like ours, I think that's the thing that most people fail to grasp, is it's something that they appreciate, but they, it's one of the first things I notice when I play other games that are, open world or allow for exploration, like the amount of stuff that we let you do that nobody else even contemplates. Like, every item in the world is a real object that has physics on it that can be knocked around and so forth. And, that you can have a quest be going on and then just stop doing it and go right and go do something else, where other games will stop you and force a load and make you go back to somewhere else. Like, all of those things require resources. And so when you're adding new DLC on top of an already huge game that allows you to do a ton of stuff, like, you have to be smart about the things that you're adding, what kind of memory it's going to require, how it's going to, it doesn't stand on its own. It has to work with every version of every game that's out there on Skyrim, regardless of what you've done or in what order. It all has to work, and then it has to work with the other DLCs that you've created. And so you start to get into the permutations on permutations, and it gets pretty mind-boggling. So, I think Dragonborn was impacted by those first two DLCs and by the things that, that we felt like we wanted to do with it. And ultimately what we got was something that felt like you were getting to do something new, but it's still in a familiar way.
I do think it's a very elegant pack, I think, because on the one hand, it's just a completely new continent, but it does integrate back into the fiction, obviously, because it's a callback to Morrowind, and that seems to address the tension you were talking about between building stuff into the world and adding things on top.
Yeah, and again, the other thing is, because you're catering largely to people who have been playing the game for a long time, you're also having to now build content for them that is basically designed for people who are already pretty damn powerful and are pretty used to killing anything they want. So, like, how are we going to keep this person entertained who's now gotten so powerful? Like, how do we... The story part is one thing. Story can be kind of separate from level, but from a gameplay standpoint, what are you doing minute to minute? What is the challenge to get from point A to point B? That's a pretty big undertaking to make sure that can stay fun as it was getting to that point.
When you said that the plan, you kind of had to change it the way you did the DLC from how you'd initially planned it, was that just because the Game Jam came along, or was it things like, obviously you had, not that it bothered us obviously, but there was some enduring problems with the PS3 DLC which took a while to fix. I mean, was that like a major sort of spanner in the works where you had to kind of stop doing things that you wanted to do because you had to sort of get over those technical problems?
That is a loaded question. First of all, important to understand that the game jam happened after the release and when we were really, really early in DLC stuff. So, we did the game jam stuff kind of in parallel with figuring out what is this DLC going to be. Having said that, some of it is just, it ends up being different than you originally planned, but that could be said for 88% of Skyrim. Like most of the game ends up being some variation of how we started, because again, we're big believers, which is what the game jam was kind of meant to highlight, of forget what it sounds like on paper or what it looks like on the whiteboard. Like, just do it in the game and then see whether it works or not, and like whether it's fun and it's something that you think other people would want to do. So it's really more about that, about, well, I had planned to implement it like X, but then it turns out that system can be exploited in all of these ways, or it causes unintended consequences. So instead, I'm going to do it like this, or that sounded like it was going to be really fun, but now that it's in the game, it's not. Yeah. But this other thing that didn't sound like it would be fun at all is awesome, and we need to do 5 times more of that. So it's really about that. It's not even a specific DLC thing. It's more of, with games like ours, how that happens. To your other question, certainly with what we saw going on the PS3, it made us a bit more sensitive to what we were doing with the DLC, and not necessarily restricting content, but just making sure that we were being even more careful, given what we were looking at addressing on the PS3 in terms of making it work better in all cases, that we were not doing things that made that even more problematic on any platform. And that isn't necessarily, you can do this feature or you can't do this feature, but how is that feature being implemented? What are the scripts that you're running, or what are the things that you're doing in the background, and is that smart, and what's the impact going to be? That's obviously always important for when you're making a game, to make sure it works on all platform. I think it probably just heightened our sensitivities even more to make sure that we weren't making decisions that were going to make things even more problematic. So.
Yeah. Although I guess it must be like a great relief to finally have got that stuff out, and because again, this is entirely academic to me, because obviously we play on Xbox,
right?
The superior platform, obviously. But it must be a big relief to kind of finally get that sorted and go, it's done.
Yes, I'll be more excited when the first one comes out next week, and then 2 weeks after that, and I'm really ready for it to all get out there. Ultimately, our goal has always been, we want all of our fans to be able to experience everything in the same ways, in the same time frame. That didn't quite work out the way we had hoped and planned. But, regardless of what anybody thinks, we did this ultimately because we felt like it was important and it was the right thing to do. And we really do believe in that mantra of, we want every customer to be able to experience, the game in the same way. Personally, definitely a relief for me. I actually haven't played any of the Skyrim DLC. I've actually been waiting. I decided that I was going to wait to play it until it was out on all platforms. So I will start playing at home. I will start playing the DLC later this month, once it starts coming out to everybody. So I'm pleased to be able to play as well.
Yeah. That's one of the noblest things I've ever heard. I'm wiping away tears.
And is that going to be it? I don't know if you can say. Are you likely to do any more DLC for Skyrim, or you're not? Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, we'll not talk about that.
Okay. And I guess, kind of going back to what I was rambling about at the beginning, really, I find it fascinating that you have a game that you can. From as far as I can tell, you could just extend it indefinitely. You put another continent on it. You could keep on doing that. I guess. Obviously, Bethesda is interested in you doing Elder Scrolls online on PC. That's a dedicated online game. Mm-hmm. Do you think? And this is purely hypothetical. Do you think you would ever get to the point, particularly, as gaming develops, everything's online. It's all about kind of richer, connected experiences. Blah 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 blah. Do you think that an Elder Scrolls game would be something where you could ship a game and then you could just keep doing DLC for it basically forever, or at least for longer than anyone else can manage?
honestly, the real answer to that is no. And the reason is that at some point, the stuff that you add, you're not adding for free. Every time you're adding new features and new things that have to be accounted for by the game, right? The game shipped like this, and now all of a sudden it has to have the ability to manage this and this and this and all these other features that the DLC adds. It's not, the amount of resources is not infinite. And at some point, you reach a point where the game would say, yeah, that's enough. There's no more room. It's a bit like going to an all-you-can-eat buffet. Like, you're not supposed to eat all you can eat, but at some point your body's going to say, yeah, that's all I got room for.
I would see it as a challenge.
It's just a wafer thin, but eventually you run out of room. So theoretically, I guess you might think that would be possible, that you could just essentially do all of Tamriel one DLC or expansion at a time. But the truth is that it doesn't just keep getting added on for free. And the other thing is the point that I brought up, which is, part of the challenge, you mentioned the Elder Scrolls Online, part of the challenge of that is you're adding a lot of extra content, and you're adding it specifically for people of a certain type, right? You don't need to add lots of new content for somebody who's at level 3. They got plenty of stuff to do. You're adding it for the guys who are sort of all the way at the top. That it becomes a bigger and bigger challenge, particularly in a game like Skyrim where it's a single player thing. So, like, it doesn't matter how powerful you let the player get. Like, that's part of the fun of it, is let them get crazy powerful where they're just raining death and creating storms and killing everything in sight. In a game like an MMO, you can't give everybody that ability, because then everybody's that powerful and there's chaos. So, with the Elder Scrolls Online, that is obviously a big thing for them to continue to have regular, consistent, good content, right after launch and going on into the future. The other thing is to keep in mind that, every time we make an Elder Scrolls game, we sort of start over. I mean, we do look at what we've done in previous games. We also talk about what are things we haven't tried or done before. But, you could look at Oblivion, which was a big success and people really liked, and we did cool DLC. But if we had kept doing content nonstop on that, you never get Skyrim, where we go back and say, we're going to change the way we do combat and how we approach things. And we want to do dragons this time. And we want to do all of these other things that on a feature level, you can't just shove in after the fact into a game and say, okay, well, now the combat works like this. So, I think we've taken it to a point, and, at some point in the future, I'm sure we'll do another Elder Scrolls game that's not the Elder Scrolls Online, another game in the vein of Skyrim. Although, sidebar, I think people are going to be really surprised how much like Skyrim the Elder Scrolls Online is, particularly if you've played it on the PC, the controls and the camera and all that stuff. But as far as a single-player thing, I'm sure at some point we'll do another one, but, we'll want to start over again and, build it from the ground up and keep the things we liked and add new things that we hadn't tried before and, see if we can make another breakthrough game that people really love, like they love Skyrim.
Can I just ask, man, it seems to me that you're getting towards a position where you could do something similar to what CCP is doing with EVE Online and Dust 514. And I think I could very easily imagine a single-player game where, you occasionally, maybe you come to a certain point in the world and you're given the option to jump into a massively multiplayer battle because it makes sense with the politics of that region or something.
Right.
Is that an idea you're looking at?
I mean, every time we make an Elder Scrolls game, we always, on some level, talk about multiplayer. But I think what we continue to come back to is, number one, it isn't necessary, because clearly we've done okay without it. Number two, is it adding anything to the game that we're trying to create, the experience we're trying to create that's missing? And what would it do to the game if you had to start to allow for a second player? And again, that goes across everything from, well, who's having the conversations with each of the NPCs? What if you both talk to the NPCs and you're nice and you're mean? Like, well, how does the quest work now? And how many enemies do I have to put on the screen now for both of you to be challenged and have fun and feel like it's cool and visceral? And, how good can those creatures look? Because I'm now putting twice as much stuff on the screen as I have to if it's a single player game. So I think once we start looking at all of those things, the answers to those haven't really changed. And, honestly, whether it's Skyrim, Dishonored, I mean, we've done plenty of games that have been single player only. Look at BioShock, who had it, and now they're taking it out. And I just think at the end of the day, people want a really good game. And if you can do that, great. And if it does really good multiplayer, because that's what it does, then everybody will play it and love it. But there's nobody clamoring for mediocre multiplayer or co-op, right? There's never an outcry for, give me something half-assed and a bullet on the back of the box. So unless we think it really fits what that game is about, whether it's an Elder Scrolls game or anything, like we adamantly refuse to be a part of that trend of let's just throw it in there because that's what people expect. It's got to be core to what the game is about.
I suppose, actually, I probably gave a bad example. I was thinking more of a sort of an online augmentation thing, almost where you use online aspects to enhance the single player. I don't know if you've played Dragon's Dogma, but
I haven't, no.
Well, this whole idea that in Dragon's Dogma you can bring in a character that another player has created and kind of personalize and have that as your ally.
I see what you're saying, and obviously that is a different kind of thing, and something that we have talked about and looked at a lot. Not specific to the Elder Scrolls, but actually across everything. This sort of notion of can you create an avatar, or can you bring the avatar that one player has created and bring them in, and they're a boss character that you have to fight, and you see how you would fare in an arena battle against your buddy, or just the different ways in which you can. This world is becoming so much more socially connected through Twitter, through Facebook, and all of the different social applications, that it only makes sense to continue to look at ways in which you can bring those connections into the game in ways that are cool and additive and not disruptive to the core game that you're making. It's something that we continue to look at. I'm curious to see how much of that gets talked about this year, not just by us but by others, and as to where that's headed. And we'll just kind of wait and see.
Do you think? I remember last time we spoke, you said we brought up the infamous horse armor, which you and you said that was an experiment, and you learned from it, and you moved on, although people were still buying it.
Somebody bought it yesterday.
Still,
you've got a personal ticker just kind of for the horse armor.
Every now and then when I go to check the reports, sometimes I'll look to see, did anybody buy horse armor yesterday? Yep, they sure did. Holy crap! Who would have thought?
Yeah. And I guess, that was the experience you moved on. Could you point to anything that you've learned from the DLC that you've done for Skyrim?
That's a good question. I don't know. It may still be too early, but sometimes it helps to have a little distance from that to get a long enough period of time from when it's been out, and not just when it's been out on one platform, but obviously, as I said before, we'd like to see what everybody thinks on all of the platforms about the experience and the things that they liked and didn't like, or want to see more of or less of. We often get a lot of feedback from fans when we have a game announced, like with Skyrim, where they say, well, I wish you could do this in Skyrim, I wish you could do that, or I wish this worked this way. And that information isn't nearly as instructive or helpful as it is to take a look at what they said about the thing that they actually played. Yeah. Right? Don't guess at what you think it's going to be like in the thing you haven't played yet. Tell me what you thought about the thing you did play. What did or didn't you like in Oblivion or in Fallout 3? What kind of systems or experiences did you like or not like? Or do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's a lot more helpful when we're taking a look at where player tastes going, what are the kinds of things that people want to do, and to marry those with our own thoughts on the things that we want to try and take on. So it's always very helpful to continue to look at even just things like achievements, like how far did people make it through any given quest line or whatever, the percentage drop off point to point, and figuring out was there something going on there in the story where that was too hard or too complicated, or they got some kind of fatigue. We tend to do a lot of that just to make sure that we're aware of how people are reacting to the stuff that we're making. So we'll continue to do that going forward, but I don't have any brilliant moments of wisdom or insight I've gleaned so far from.
Okay. Is there anything any particularly kind of weird instances of player behaviour that you can talk about? I don't know, I have a cupboard in Winterhold that contains everything I have ever owned. Or at least it did until somebody took my save game, threw it all away.
Still a sore point, this is.
This is yes. Let's not go there. But is there any? Do people kind of always throw swords off one particular cliff or
well,
something.
you know, and a lot of that stuff we tend to get more anecdotally. Like we don't have a system where we find out like the places in the world in which everyone seems to drop stuff. That tends to come either more anecdotally or sometimes when we get save games, if somebody says, you know, I'm experiencing this or that, and we say, well, we don't know what you're seeing, so can you send that to us and we'll take a look. And while we're looking at that, we'll also be like, would you look at what this guy like, what in the hell game was he playing? So, you know, anecdotally, the stuff that I love is just how much people get into an aspect of the world that doesn't seem to matter to just about anybody else. Like, I decided I'm going to go through the world and collect all of the X. And that's just what they did. Like, they created a new character whose life quest was going to be like to collect, you know, every wheel of cheese in the game, like to create something that is so rich and have people be able to hone in on such an incredibly specific goal in life for their character is just awesome. And I think a testament to the team and the kind of game they create that just allows that sort of free-form true role-playing. Like it really is about, you know, you can be whoever you want, and if it's your world is all about cheese, like, go be that guy.
No worries. On the collection front, I had a very specific question. At least I think it's quite specific, which you may not know the answer to.
Okay.
But what's up with the bug jars? Have you been getting anything about that?
Yes, I have seen a number of questions about that. I read a wildly entertaining, what would you call it, like conspiracy theory or something online where somebody tried to connect all the dots and explain exactly the meaning of all of the jars and the things that you find in them. And then I went and actually got the answer.
I almost don't want you to tell me.
I'm not going to, because I would hate. Sometimes it's much more fun to speculate on. You know, it's sort of like the disappearance of the dwarves in the Elder Scrolls. Like we could, you know, probably easily come up with the answer and tell everybody. But what fun would that be? It's a lot more fun to figure out, you know, what everybody thinks happened. And so in this case, I think it's more fun for everybody to continue to speculate. You know, that's the equivalent of our suitcase or our briefcase in Pulp Fiction, you know, that glows. And everybody wants to know what exactly that is. Like, well, sometimes it's better not to know what it is. Yeah.
But you go so far as to say the elaborate conspiracy, like no one's correctly guessed the bug jars yet.
I can neither confirm nor deny the conspiracy theorists and whether they've gotten the exact answer.
Oh, that's just going to make them mad. Something just to drift away from Skyrim for a second, because I thought that this. I mean, I thought this was interesting. I was wondering whether this said something about Bethesda as a company. Is that you did? There was some Rage DLC recently that came out really long after the game, and I wondered if that was sort of, you know, and obviously releasing Skyrim DLC far after the fact, and that's doing really well. I just wondered if was that like a conscious thing where you're trying to keep your games going for longer, or was that just a bit more sort of circumstantial? They had something.
I think I would chalk that one up to circumstantial. But in general, obviously, we're big believers in supporting our stuff. Obviously, we put out the smaller DLC for Dishonored already, but have talked about, you know, the fact that there are 2 larger DLCs in the work at Arcane that you know, are a full story and, you know, hours of gameplay, and, you know, you get to play as Dowd, who's the other assassin you see at the start of the game who kills the Empress that's under your protection. Spoiler alert, I guess I should have said that if you haven't played Dishonored yet, my bad.
That's not the opening 3 minutes. I think I was going to spoiling that. Yeah.
If you don't know that's how the game starts at this point. But you know, so we are committed to continuing to put out stuff that is of value and is substantive after the release, because we think that there is an audience for that stuff. And, you know, the DLC has done pretty well for us given how long after release it was. And I think you guys gave it a pretty good score, like 9 out of 10 or something like that.
I loved it.
Yeah, it was fun, and it wasn't dramatically wholly different. But, you know, if you like Rage, which I did, I really enjoyed playing it. Then it's a fun couple of hours of additional stuff to do, new weapon, new guys to shoot. So you know, as a company, obviously we've done very well with DLC for Bethesda Game Studio stuff, but it's again, kind of in the multiplayer vein, if it's something that fits well with what the game offers and we can continue to expand or add to that experience, we absolutely want to.
Do you think that goes hand in hand with saying you're going to make really good single-player games and not bolt on, mediocre multiplayer? Do you think hand in hand that goes, all right, so you're going to then expand that single-player experience post-release?
I would say that's a very fair statement, that we appreciate that when you do a single-player game and there's not a multiplayer or a co-op component to supplement what it is that you're offering, that we always are looking for ways to add to that experience for folks who really like it and want more. In the case where you can add it into their existing experience, we'll do that kind of stuff. For a game like Dishonored, where that doesn't really make sense, there's nothing, you wouldn't put a side missions DLC out there where, well, no, you're still Corvo, but you're going to go off and do this other thing. Like, it doesn't really fit. But doing Dowd felt like it really did fit, where you can stay in this world, but your powers are going to be different. You have a different story that's going on. We thought it'd be kind of cool if the start of your game is the start of Corvo's game, but you're now going off on very different paths, those kinds of things. So yeah, clearly we want to continue to give the single player folks replay, whether it's or additional play, whether it's through replaying the game, which in Dishonored, it's a lot of folks we've heard will go through and play the game and then realize sort of the possibilities as they're going through and try and play it again and go like a non-violent route and try that way. Or through DLC that gives you, sort of a fresher, different experience within that same world.
And would you say that you would expect that for single-player game, like your single-player games in future? Do you think it's reasonable to expect that you will continue to do DLC like well after release? Like, as a company, you seem quite comfortable with, not, there's that thing that says, day one DLC exists because that's when interest in DLC is at its peak. Statistically speaking, that's what the analysts say. But Bethesda seems quite happy to release DLC way after release and kind of keep the game a live concern for months and months and months.
Yeah, I guess the answer to that question, John, is that part of it just depends on, well, what are you making? Like, if we could have created Dragonborn and had it been just as good and put it out 3 weeks after, we probably would. But that's not even remotely possible. So it's a hypothetical that's not even worth debating because it takes a long time to make stuff like a Dawnguard or a Dragonborn. Like, it's not the kind of stuff you can just turn around in 2 weeks or 3 weeks and have it work. So it's not that we're trying to put it out much later. It's just, I think, kind of to your point, we're willing to do it later. We're willing to continue to support it early, middle, and late because we continue to believe that there's a demand and an interest in that kind of stuff. But we're not stalling just for stalling's sake. It's
yeah.
We're so different DLC is going to take different lengths of time. We don't want to be in a rush to try and get something out. We want to make sure we're planning and doing something that is of adequate size and scope, that when it does come out within that time frame, people are going to go, that's cool, that's worth doing. Yeah. I think when we start talking about the Dishonored DLC here pretty soon, that folks are going to see it and say, that looks pretty cool. Like, I enjoyed Dishonored, and I think I will take a break from whatever game I'm playing right now and spend a few hours, back in that world doing some new cool stuff. I think folks are really going to enjoy it. I guess to the kernel of your question, we are not in some kind of a rush to start doing day one DLC releases or day one DLC announcements or on disc deal. Like, we're pretty happy with what we have figured out, and ultimately what we figured out for the DLC is no different than the game, which is that people are willing to pay for really good content. And so we feel like if we put everything we have into the base game, we will find an audience that will buy that. And then if you apply that same approach to DLC and you just put it in a slightly different perspective, which is, well, we're not making a full $60 thing, we're making some smaller version of that. And what is the right size, and what is that experience, and what is the price point that is appropriate for that? If you hit the right sweet spot, you'll be fine. You can charge $30 for DLC, which we have. You can charge $5 for DLC, which we have. And both of those experiences can be great, provided what you're getting feels like, I totally got my money. $30 for Shivering Isles, that's a steal because it felt like a whole new game. And $5 for Hearthfire, like, that's what I wanted. I wanted to be able to do a house and adopt a kid and to do all this stuff, or the the Dunwall City trials for Dishonored, all of those things. People felt like were appropriate, so we feel pretty good about our approach.
Do you think the kind of cynicism about Day One DLC has kind of got to the point where it actually harms Day One DLC sales, or is it very much just kind of a minority of vocal people on the internet complain?
I mean, certainly the reaction to it is pretty apparent. I'm not sure if I have an exact opinion, because we're not doing it. So and I try not to get into judging what other folks do. I can't really. I certainly wouldn't appreciate it when they're chiming in on what we should or shouldn't be doing, particularly because, like, how would they know?
Yeah.
But I understand where it's coming from, which is, you do have this audience, that you do have their attention, and I think there was, at least amongst a certain segment of the gaming audience, I don't think they quite understand development process and the point at which you have to stop making the game and you have to finish the game. And so the content people stop making new content a fair amount of time before it ships. It's not like in the old days where it was a day before or a week before. Like, no, there's a pretty long gap where your artists and designers and folks are, fixing a bug if they get one, or they may be playing the game to find bugs, but they're not making a new anything for a long period of time. And you have creative people who are used to creating. So why would you make them wait, some period of time, months in some cases, to start making new stuff just so that you could say it was after DLC? And so if you know what they're going to be making, why wouldn't you talk about it? Again, but I'm sort of guessing at where that's coming from. And, ultimately everybody has to do what they think works best for them. And the customers have the choice to buy or not buy as they see fit.
Yeah.
I just wondered basically what your thoughts were on kind of science fiction and fantasy in general in gaming at the moment, because my great, huge, hopeful theory is that actually next gen it's going to be all about sci-fi and fantasy, because I look at things like Destiny, and obviously you guys are a major force, and I think your strength is that you have a big portfolio of science fiction and fantasy worlds that actually complement each other. Like, I mean, people compare Fallout to Rage, but actually they're very different. So yeah, just wondered about your sort of thoughts on that and Bethesda's place in it.
Well, obviously there are two areas that we love to play in, and I don't see us moving away from that anytime soon. Particularly when you consider that it was 2001 when there were an awful lot of people telling us that there was no audience on a console for a game like Morrowind, that it was far too complex and complicated a thing, that it was too nerdy and too fantasy, and nobody would get it. And then we sold the hell out of that game on the Xbox. And then all of a sudden everybody was, trying to figure out, well, how are we going to do our thing like that? And there were projects popping up at other publishers where they were trying to do similar things, and we did Oblivion, and that became even bigger on the 360. So it's pretty clear, and then Skyrim has been better than both of them. So and Fallout 3, as you mentioned, being a very different take on open world and being more sci-fi, this kind of cool retro sci-fi, but still at its heart a role-playing game. Maybe one with guns and exploding heads, but a role-playing game nevertheless. Fallout New Vegas, being another title in that series that did very well. It's very clear that our audience and the gaming audience in general loves that kind of stuff when done well and done right. So obviously we're going to continue to make those kinds of games that both excite us from a creative standpoint, and that it's and we feel like we can find an audience for that from a consumer standpoint. And, as you said, there are tons of examples of that stuff from a development standpoint that's doing really well. And ultimately, I think what's going to serve the industry well is that everybody keeps making the stuff that they love. If you want to make a realistic, grounded first-person shooter about special ops or whatever it is, and you're really good at that, please keep making that, because the more variety there is, I think all of this stuff, when done really well, does nothing but help the industry bring in more gamers who are looking for more good stuff. And so, I can play a shooter like Black Ops and appreciate it for what it is, and then shift gears and go play Far Cry 3 and appreciate that for what it is as a very different experience, where it sort of blurs the line between, well, it's not exactly sci-fi, but it's got some sci-fi-y stuff to it, or at least some cultish, the tattoos and all that stuff. And then you go to Borderlands 2, which is very clearly very sci-fi, but also a very different kind of experience, and each one of them does very well at the experience it's trying to provide. So it's not like I'm saying, well, let's do more sci-fi shooters. I'm just saying, no, you guys just keep doing what you really want to do, because all of you are doing a great job at it. Like, it's not like as an industry we need to look and say, well, we have 4 of these and 3 of these, but 8 of these, so we need a few less of that. I think there's plenty of world in the gaming space for the Journeys of the world, the Call of Duties of the world, the Skyrims of the world, the Walking Deads, all providing very different experiences, but done to just brilliantly good levels of execution. You will not find me proclaiming the death of any platform, the death of any genre. I think there's room for everything, from the Facebook stuff to the iOS stuff to the next-gen consoles to PCs, online gaming, because we're reaching an age more and more where there's guys like us who have never really not known gaming, right? My dad grew up without video games, but I never really did. And my kids sure as hell don't know what it's like to not have video games from an even earlier age than I started. And as we continue to go, I'm not stopping just because when I was, 18, that there were no 40-year-olds really doing a lot of gaming. I'm not stopping now, and I'm not stopping 20 years from now. So the target audience and the number of people out there playing is only going to continue to go up, because the generations that didn't game, they're getting older, and all the younger ones know nothing but video games on every device they own. So I think it's all good.
Yeah. Okay, so I guess to kind of take it home, obviously, it's going to be a really exciting year this year. There's, we're expecting some big kind of platform changes and stuff. And I was thinking, just looking at the kind of Bethesda Studios lineup before we came in, you've got a lot of guys who have been quiet for a long time, like id and Tango and those guys. Mm-hmm. Is it going to be obviously I'm not looking. You're obviously not going to announce a game on our podcast, but is this going to be a big year for Bethesda, or are we going to hear from those guys soon, or are you going to kind of take it?
I think you'll hear us making considerably more noise this year than we did last year as a publisher. Obviously, the Elder Scrolls Online is out. We've got the Dishonored DLC, but we will be announcing new stuff and making some noise. And I think when we get the chance to show you guys what we're up to, that folks are going to sit up and take notice, because I think we're continuing to do the kind of stuff that we really get excited about, and people get really excited about when they hear what we're up to, which is, continuing to push the boundaries, reinvent, find really smart, passionate teams who know what the hell they're doing and have an idea that they really want to do and do well. And so who that is and what it'll be is TBD. But, when I'm in London next to do this next, hopefully we can talk more and we'll gauge your reaction.
Awesome. All right. Well, I will very much look forward to that. Pete, thank you very much for coming along.
Absolutely.
As always.
Thanks again
for
having me.
Thanks. Cheers.